Andrea, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for asking. I want to start off and talk about your background a little bit. I find it very fascinating because you have a very non traditional path into the corporate space. You started as a journalist in the news world, you transitioned to fitness, and now you're in internal communications. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how you made those transitions between those different industries?
Absolutely. And the quick answer is not on purpose. So I do have a very untraditional background when it comes to corporate communications. Like you said, I started out in journalism for about 12 years, and then I fell into content marketing and actually didn't even know I was doing content marketing. I was like, oh, this is kind of like journalism, except for CrossFit. And I loved CrossFit so much that I just sort of fell into that and was doing journalistic style articles, right? Creating that content, kind of like magazine length feature stories and taking a very journalistic approach to it. And so I didn't realize until after the fact when someone was like, hey, that's content marketing. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Didn't realize that's what I was doing. And then just sort of fell into, after I left CrossFit, got recruited for a job at Agilent Technologies, which is a biotech company here in Silicon Valley. And they make instruments and kind of consumables for biotech. So they provide, um, they provide stuff to Guardant, actually. They provide all kinds of consumables and other things to Guardant. So Guardant is a customer of Agilent's. And then I got recruited into this role that I'm in now and sort of ended up here. So it wasn't part of any kind of grand plan or scheme or anything like that. My path it has been very untraditional. And, at first I saw that as a negative when I started, especially when I started at Agilent. And that was kind of my first time being in kind of maybe your typical kind of corporate environment. And the words were different and I didn't understand the parlance or the lingo. And I'm like, I'm really confused and I'm a little lost. And I just realized that we had different words for things, right? Like at Agilent and at Guardant, we call it an editorial calendar. In the newsroom, we'd call it a budget, right? It's just completely different parlance. And I had to get accustomed to that. But what I will say is that if you're in communications and you're kind of thinking about like, well, that path doesn't seem linear or how can I get there? It's the basics are the same, right? The biggest part, maybe the biggest kind of decision you have to make when you're thinking about communicating is who's your audience. And we all do that, right? I mean, some of us in a professional setting kind of think of it a little bit, maybe more strategically, but literally every human does this. You talk to your mother differently than you talk to your significant other, than you talk to your sibling, than you talk to your friend, right? We have that in us already. So all of that is the same. Identifying an audience. How do I resonate with this audience? And that's really like the two basics. That's all the same. But yeah, I am kind of the odd one out usually in both of these settings, in both Guardant and Agilent. I don't have a traditional corporate comms background.
Yeah, I love that you're open to, just taking that path as it comes to you. I oftentimes the people I speak to on the podcast say that like, well, it's just sort of like that's how they end up there, and they're happy that they did. I know I talk to people who have a very strict career path, and this is what they want to do. But then I also really love finding people like you who this is just the path I've been on, and I've just sort of along for the ride, and and working in it.
Yeah, it hasn't always been like that. I actually, like when I first started my career, and all through my journalism career and up through I got to CrossFit, I was very much like, I have a plan and this is my plan and this is what I'm doing and I'm executing. And so what happened to me is that, so at CrossFit, there was I worked there when the founder was still involved, and he's no longer involved. He sold the company maybe a year or two ago. And so I was involved when the founder kind of had a change of heart about the direction of the company. I was among the people who was laid off. And I probably should have expected it at the time, but I didn't. And so I kind of fell into a space where like, well, what am I good at? I'm not really sure how these skills are transferable. And like I said, because in the corporate world, the parlance and the lingo is different than my journalistic experience, I didn't think that there was a match there. I didn't think that my skills would be useful someplace else. And it was after I got to Agilent and, sunk my teeth in after a few months, and I was like, oh, this is just a different way of saying this. I just am not used to the way these people are speaking or the different lingo that they're using. But my skills were transferable. And that was kind of like a big aha moment for me, where I just kind of got in a rut and didn't think that, I mean, anybody who gets laid off knows how horrible a feeling that is. Like your company is basically saying like, we don't need you anymore. And it's not a fun place to be mentally. And so I think I kind of went from like, I have this plan, this is my path, to like, it just got disrupted. And then I was like, all right, well, let's ride this thing out and see what happens. And it was at that time at Agilent that I really started to understand, appreciate, and kind of sort of fall in love with the power of internal communications at a company, how it can shape and strengthen a culture. And at Agilent has a great CEO who is very passionate about that and was able to change the culture over the course of 5 years. And he even talks about that with Wall Street. So that was something that I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is really cool, right? Like I jumped into this environment where I was like, I don't really fit in here. What am I doing here? And it developed into like, wow, this is awesome. Look at this. Like I can really help here. I can be one of these pillars of sort of holding up company culture.
I'm writing this down because I want to come back to that idea of changing culture and IC's role in that. But before we move on, would you just talk a little bit about, give a high level overview of your role as Director of Internal Communications at Guardant Health?
Sure thing. So I am actually establishing the function from scratch. So Guardant is a very fast moving, still young company. So there is a lot to learn about communicating maturely, about having processes. So a lot of what I do is kind of saying is kind of stopping people and being like, hey, so the reason we need to do this is because XYZ. So there's a lot of explaining that. What is internal communications? I have had that discussion with people. People are like, I don't know what that means. So going and explaining that, explaining why even bother, like why do we need continuity? Why do we need consistency? Why do we need to communicate this throughout the organization? Why does executive management team need to cascade this down and ask their direct reports to communicate this to the rest of their team? So that is a lot of what I do is kind of establishing those processes. Some of them even minor. Like the other day, I sent out an email about, hey, this is how we need to handle company-wide emails. You can't just send them willy-nilly. You can't just send them whenever you want. Because we sort of dilute the potency of email and people just started, ignoring it. So a lot of what I'm doing is that, but a lot of what I do also is kind of what many out there might expect. Like, I create a lot of decks, I organize events, I am in charge of the all hands and working with our co-CEOs to present that and organize that. We also are big on what our foremost value is, put the patient first. So we're always thinking about how we can think of patients as our own family members. And frankly, and unfortunately, it's not very hard because most of us have been touched by cancer, whether it's ourselves or a family member or a friend. It's unfortunately very pervasive disease. So I also try to get a hold of actual patients to come and talk to employees to really motivate and inspire them to keep working. Because, what we're doing is we're in a very competitive marketplace, like super, super competitive. And we need to find a way to really connect with employees so that they stick around. So it's probably...
Bringing that voice in is such a key. I mean, when I've worked in financial services and in higher education, bringing in that, why are we doing this moment for everyone to ground again is one of the most important tools. I think, IC folks can really lean on to get the most bang for the buck.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has to be real.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know. So you're building this internal communications program. I mean, I've done that. It's wildly overwhelming. You have so many things to do. Yeah, anything from how do we send emails, what's in our email signature, what goes in all hands, what is everything. It's everything. How are you prioritizing that to not get overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's a great question because sometimes I feel like I fail at that. I fail at prioritizing getting overwhelmed. So one thing that I think is helpful in my particular situation is that I mentioned before that we have co-CEOs at Guardant. So we have two CEOs. They are both founders of the company. And I report to one of them, which is pretty rare. in internal communications. It happens, but it's not common. That is hugely helpful to me in prioritizing and also in affecting change, because he really cares a lot about the culture and he wants to make some significant changes as we mature from sort of a startup mentality. We're not a startup, but we have that mentality still. Some of that's good, some of that's bad, to a mature organization where people feel like they have a good work-life balance throughout the company. People feel productive and efficient, and they're doing fulfilling work. And so there's a lot of stuff that we need to get done that's not internal communications related in that respect. But I think what I'm getting at is that it has to start from the top, that change. You have to get that support from the top, because you can have people down below that are like everything you want to see, but they're going to bump up against, that senior management level and not be able to get things done anymore because they're pushing down, kind of figuratively speaking, right? So, or pushing, I guess, kind of against what the change we want to see. So that's hugely important. If I can get him on board, he can kind of proliferate that downward, right? And that's a rare situation, but I would say, like at Agilent, I did not report to the CEO. I was a couple levels down. And so there we had someone, or you have someone still, he's still there, who deeply cares about the culture. So that was huge. That was huge, because you saw his staff, his direct reports, really trying to imitate and echo those values and the way that we treated other people. And I just can't stress that enough. And I think, during the pandemic, a lot changed for corporate and internal communications, a lot. And it keeps changing. And one of the good things that came out of that, I think, is leadership at most places realized how important we were.
The value of internal comms really bubbled up. Absolutely.
And so that's a good place to be right now, because now internal comms, if it didn't before, now it has a seat at the table. Now it's like, all right, we need to involve you to make sure that employees have an understanding of this, that employees appreciate this, that employees feel valued, that employees feel recognized, all those things that are important. So that to me is key. Like, how are you working with leadership to ensure that they're on board? And sometimes it takes a lot of explaining, of things that, all of us get comfortable in our own industries and our own job to where, like, well, of course you would need to do this. Why would you say it like that? Right. But sometimes people just don't necessarily, understand that. It depends on the audience you're working with. In biotech, we have a lot of people that are really technical. We have quite a number of people who are very introverted. So we need to figure out a way, to work with them and help them to understand the value of employees feeling fulfilled, of feeling appreciated, feeling recognized, that they are critical, right? They are any company's most valuable asset. It doesn't matter who it is. Like, that is the most important thing. You can have a wonderful mission, but if employees aren't on board, like, it's only so far you can go.
Right. Absolutely. I've got a bunch of questions based on everything you've just said, because it's exactly what I want to get into. So I'm going to move into our first segment called Story Time.
Welcome to Story Time. Story Time. Story Time.
Let me tell you a story.
I want to back up. You've mentioned CrossFit quite a bit. I'm a big fan of CrossFit. I lived in Madison, Wisconsin for many years, where the CrossFit games are every summer, and probably will be for a while. But you've been in there, I believe, about 10 years, if I remember correctly. You're currently a head coach and leading learning and development at CrossFit. How has your time at CrossFit really shaped your career in internal comms? And are there parallels you can draw between the two?
Yeah, so you're right, I worked at CrossFit headquarters for about 10 years. And then the whole time I've been out in Northern California, I've been coaching at CrossFit Silicon Valley. So a CrossFit gym, and that's where I'm head coach. So there's a part-time kind of, I do this for fun sort of thing, and lead learning and development for the coaches there. So it's an interesting question, because at the time when I was involved in CrossFit and the founder was still involved, and like I said, he's not involved anymore, he was a very iconoclastic man in his view. So he would look at things that would kind of best practices at other places, and just because they were best practices, he'd be like, we're not doing that. That's corporate, right? And there was a lot of appeal to that for many of us. I mean, CrossFit was born out of controversy, and it's still a little controversial, I guess. And so we wanted to kind of be like the anti-corporate, right? But at the end of the day, there's some things you just can't get away from. I mean, you need to communicate with other people. So there were a lot of things that I saw at CrossFit that I felt like I learned from, in terms of, number one, how you can really inspire and motivate people, right? That was huge for me, is seeing how you can get everyone moving in the same direction. And that was everything from him as a leader, the founder as a leader, who still to this day is one of the best public speakers I've ever heard. Just incredible, and could really just rally and galvanize people around the mission, the objective, whatever it was at that time. So that was a big one. Is we had, I was a writer there, and then we had writers, we had videographers, we had, travel coordinators, HR, like everyone. And what I saw there for a while is just everyone, no matter what their role was, they were like, we are helping make people's lives better through fitness. Everyone believed that, like sincerely believed that, even if, no matter what your role, no matter if you didn't really directly touch, an individual at a gym and help them with their chronic disease through fitness and nutrition. That was a moment in my life that I will cherish. I'm not sure it will ever come back of that level of people were so fired up about CrossFit. And I mean the people who work there. So, if I took a spreadsheet and we were to have logged, like, okay, everybody who worked at CrossFit HQ, these are the number of hours you worked today. Well, you were in the office, right, at that time. And then you go to a CrossFit gym. And because you work at HQ, like, you have a certain kind of role even in that community. And then maybe like after hours, you go and hang out with a bunch of people from work and you're talking shop the whole time. Like our whole lives were CrossFit. And so if you had logged that on a spreadsheet, anyone who did not work there or didn't know much about it might have looked at that and said, these people are overworked and they're going to burn out. This is not sustainable. But that's not the way that we viewed it. Like we loved it, couldn't get enough of it. It was just, give us more. We wanted to be involved in everything. And how can you get people to that point, right? Like that's the trick, that's the magic. And that was truly, something that I'm not sure that you see that in many places. And for me, I think that might have been like that was my one in a lifetime kind of experience that I had. But that's always the goal. So I always think of that, like, how can I get closer to that? Or wherever I'm at, how can I move like the employees closer to that, where and the reasons being not because we want them to work 80 hours a week, but because we want them to feel fulfilled. We want them to feel like this is meaningful work. This is fulfilling work. I love doing this. And that when you love doing something, it doesn't feel like work. And when it does, because at the end of the day, you're exhausted and you might have just like been doing stuff that's not particularly high brain power, but you're just like, I am so tired. I just need to have a glass of wine and lie on the couch.
Right.
And it's, yeah.
I'm sorry. Is there any parallels you can draw? You mentioned in a previous role, you'd watched a leader who cared about the culture and changed the culture.
Yeah.
And then thinking about the culture at CrossFit.
Yeah.
And your role in helping change the culture at a previous company. Give us the do's and don'ts. How does that happen? Like, where does the enthusiasm come from? How did the employees, receive it? Just help bring me along in that. I'm very curious about changing culture.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you asked this question because I saw a lot of parallels. After I'd been at Agilent for probably like 6 months, I saw a lot of parallels between Agilent and CrossFit, which seems crazy because CrossFit was a private company. It probably only ever employed maybe like roughly like 200 people right? We had a lot at that time. There were seminar staff that would travel all over the world teaching courses at that time. I don't believe they're full-time employees. They might be now. And then Agilent, which was, publicly traded company, 16,400 employees all over the world, way different, not founder led, but it had some similarities. And those similarities were, you heard from the leader often. So after the pandemic kind of, first struck in the Northern California area and we all were sent home, the CEO of Agilent started making home videos, checking in, like saying like, here's the latest stuff. He called his office at home the Agilent newsroom. And by the way, like no one in internal comms told him to do this. He just did it. I'd love to take credit for that, but he just did it, right? And that was awesome. So those are the similarities. They talked often to the employees, rallied them behind, this is what we're doing, and this is why you are integral to this process. And we care about you here. You matter. Those were like the three main messages that both of them had in common. So people felt safe, they felt supported, and they felt excited about that. And it's that leadership component and the communication from that leader was huge, because in both places I saw what happened is that everyone was like, we're in this together and we're all like rowing that way. There was agreement on that. And that filtered down to how people treated each other, which was a pleasant experience, and how people kind of viewed what we were doing. And like I said, the direction that we were going, there was unification around that, galvanization around that. And so when I had that realization, I was like, that's so crazy, right? Like these companies could not be more different, because when you go into Agilent, like it's sort of like I would say socially conservative, not politically conservative. It's kind of like a socially conservative place, right? And CrossFit, if anyone knows anything about CrossFit, I mean, they used to post like naked pictures on the internet of athletes, right? It always was trying to push the envelope of like challenge you in terms of what you thought was kind of right or prudent or whatever. So totally different philosophies, but very similar reactions from employees. And I feel that boiled down to the leader.
Yeah. How are you measuring along the way? I mean, I heard you talk about like the employees were excited, they cared. How are you gauging that?
Yeah, a lot of it was employee comments. So, everything from comments on, the videos that we posted of a leader speaking, particularly CEO at Agilent. So how many views are we getting this? How many comments are we getting? How many comments are we getting through email? And then employees would contact us. They would feel like so moved by something. They would send something, and either to that leader or to us, or we had access to, they kind of had like an alias mailbox. So we would take a look at that and say like, all right, like how is this working? Agilent also does a yearly, they call it a leadership survey, but it's kind of like a pulse survey, but it's done each year and it's connected to best places to work. And so they take that very seriously there. So it's kind of broken down by employees are kind of, I would say, not identified, but they are kind of, you can tell which teams people are on. So
I say like, are you in finance? Are you in sales?
Right.
Are you? Yeah, okay.
Exactly. And so then the leader of those teams or organizations or departments will take that feedback and ingest it, read it, ingest it, really allow it to percolate and see what kind of changes need to be made. And that was something that was a very big deal. It wasn't like, here's another pulse survey. Tell us if you're happy. Okay, bye. It was quite a thing. And the CEO is the one who sent out the message about it. It's like, this is why we're doing this. This is why this is important. Tell us where we're failing and tell us what's working. So there was a lot of measurement there. And I think, that's critical, right? You have to have that data, and especially to even for yourself, just to know what you're doing. But it also will help you to uh, gain another head count or spend money on some more technology. You need that to be able to prove your case. And especially at a place, like Guardant, where we have so many scientists that are focused on what's the data, show me the evidence behind this. I need to make sure that I am being very mindful of the details.
Yeah, yeah. I just want to call out, as you were talking about, that one of the things that I hear, whether it be about DE&I, any sort of change or any initiative that's important to a company, I guess is what I'm getting at, needs to be CEO led. They need to have the support of the CEO. And they already mentioned about CrossFit, and the examples you're just giving is that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, it can only go so far, right? Like I mentioned before, like you can have a huge swath of the employee population that maybe has a deep understanding of what needs to happen, but it'll only go so far because they're trying to kind of percolate it up. And if those folks are resistant and they're like, no, and they keep pushing back against it, then it really can only go so far. And I mean, the leadership really, I mean, it sets the tone for the company. I mean, they really do, right? I mean, in the same way that I coach at CrossFit and I have people from all walks of life and ages and backgrounds come in, like I as the coach set the tone for the class. So if I'm in a bad mood before I get there, I need to get that out of my head because I need to make that the best hour of their day. And who knows what they came from and what they just experienced. They might have had a bad day. Now it's my turn to kind of switch that and make it a good hour. I mean, that's what people in any kind of leadership position, whether it's one that is an actual rank and title, or it's just you are a leader. Like that's on you to try and do that. And so without them, without their buy-in, it can only go so far. And it's probably in the end kind of a recipe for disaster, really, right? Like everyone needs to be moving in the same direction or you're just gonna the boat is gonna crack.
I want to move into our next segment, getting tactical.
I'm trying to figure out tactics, and to be perfectly honest, I didn't have to worry about tactics.
Get some real details from you, Andréa, some real tips and tricks of how to execute. We've been talking a lot about change. So I'd love to talk with you more about change management and how the role internal communications play. I read somewhere, it was like yesterday or today, that 70% of change initiatives could fail for any number of reasons. But I really want to focus on what I see internal communications can do to help avoid failure. First, I'd love to get your opinion. What is the relationship between change management and internal communications? It's often used interchangeably, and I'd love to have your opinion on that.
Yeah, it's huge. I mean, even so at Guardant, I mentioned that I'm starting the function from scratch. So there's a lot of this is what internal communications is. This is why we need to do this process. And it's because of where Guardant is in terms of its maturity as a company. Now at Agilent, much older, established company, twice as old. And we had a lot of people, or you have a lot of people there, or I won't say a lot, maybe a significant amount of people who came from HP because Agilent was spun off of HP. So you have people that are like, I've been with Agilent 40 years. And you're like, hold on, Agilent's only been around for 20. I don't get how that works. So they came from HP and they just kind of continued, right? There was a lot of hey, we've always done it this way. That's not how we do it. So I had to do the same thing. So as you said, they can be interchangeable. And I think the biggest part of this as an internal communicator is patience. Prioritize, have a plan, have your strategy like for a year. Figure out what's the most important thing and realize that you can't just like in your mind, what you need to do. Like, okay, this has to happen. This is bad. This can't happen this way. But if you just flip that switch and you flip too many of them, and like this is different, this is different, this is different, people are like, they in all likelihood they'll probably ignore you. They might become irritated with you, and then you've regressed in terms of your effectiveness with them.
Yeah, change fatigue is huge. I think that's probably what you're alluding to there. I know that I've worked at companies where everything was changing, and people were just like, I can't handle any more change.
Yeah, exactly. You're exactly right. And put that further into the context of the world we've been living in as a society, as a global society. And it's like, now what? Right? It's compounding this effect. So I have to be very mindful of that. I have to be very careful Um, when other people get impatient with me and are like, well, how come you haven't rolled out this process yet? Because I know that it needs to be, I know that. But if I do this too quickly, I have to bring people along. I have to help them to understand. I have to show them my value. I have to earn their trust. And then we can start having a conversation about, okay, this is what needs to happen. Like I mentioned, so to get real specific, that process for company-wide email. So the process had been, I don't know what's coming and when it's coming. And it'll be sent to a distribution list. And I, on the other end of it, I either approve or reject this for release to the whole company. Literally, it could happen at any time. Didn't know when it was coming at all. I got no heads up because that's what people were used to, right? And someone on the other end, it was IT before because there was no internal communications, was like, yep, approve. I mean, it was a rubber stamp. So I needed to wait. I needed to get more visibility, right? And that happened I am on the all hands. Like I'm the one kind of moderates questions, asks questions. People need to get used to seeing my face, understanding my value, understanding how I can be helpful to them and useful to them. And I only rolled out that process. What was it? Was it last week or week before? I mean, I've been here, 9 months? And someone else could have argued that was an easy one. You should have just done it right away. Well, people are so used to doing this. Like first I had to get people to come around to, hey, not every single person we hire needs a company-wide email. Like we're at 1,420 or something in terms of employees, 1,420, somewhere around there. We can't send out an email for every single new hire we have. I mean, we've been hiring at a record pace. And I need to get that part done first. All right. I've kind of transitioned everyone over. They're now posting that on a dedicated Slack channel that's searchable. It's all in one place. People can find it. So that was kind of step one. And then what I did is I got a couple of people involved early. So I said, hey, I'd really love to do this. Like instead of sending your email out on 4:30 on Fridays.
I know that, Andrea. I know that.
Right?
Yep.
I had
here
to
at 4:30 waiting for final edits.
Right.
You're
I'm
sending
like,
at 6.
Yeah. Yes. And you're like, it's
Nobody's
Friday,
reading it.
for God's sakes. No one's here. Yeah. So I got to move that up. But in that process, I had to explain. They're like, I don't understand why we can't just send it at this time. Okay. Well, some employees read it because I get some comments like, okay. So I have to go through that explanation. That takes time. Now, but once I can get them as supporters, and that's an email that's actually sent every week, once I can get them on board, and I got someone else on board early in the process, someone from, it was 2 people, one from our program management office, and they loved process, and regulatory and quality also loved process. And then someone from IT, more process lovers. So I got a group of folks to kind of adopt early. And so when I sent out that email saying, here's the process, and I kept it super simple. It wasn't a lot of verbiage and explanation. It was just like, this new process goes into effect. And in the name of continuous improvement, this process goes to effect this date. Here's the process. Step 1, 2, 3. Here's the reason for this process. Short list. And then thank you to all these early adopters who have already been doing this. Add in a little emoji of a trophy. Simple stuff. But that was huge because I already had people doing it. So no one could come to me and say, well, this isn't going to work. No one's going to do it. So I already had people doing it.
That's interesting. I like that. I was going to ask you, that's one of the things that came to mind as you were talking is, what are the components of a good change communication?
Oh, gosh. Right? Yeah.
And so let's talk about that. I mean, you're talking about sending out that message, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? When are we doing it?
Yeah.
And then I love that. And thank you to everyone who's already been doing it.
Right.
So get rid of that naysayer of no one's going to want to do this.
Right. Yeah.
Is there anything you would add?
Yeah, that's huge. And I think maybe those are all the major components. And I think maybe adding into that would be timing. Some things kind of take a little bit more of a phased approach than others. So when I got here, I started meeting right away with folks in our infrastructure engineering group in IT. And I'm like, hey, teach me everything you know about our current intranet. I know that that's kind of in my purview, and I would like to change it because it's a site that doesn't have, it doesn't allow for interaction, employee interaction. It's not dynamic, super stale. I think people forgot about some of the pages they created there. Like it's just kind of, it's not a
It's like a
dynamic.
graveyard and it becomes a repository. And
Right,
yes.
exactly. And so I started planting that seed then. I think I was maybe 2-3 weeks in when I was like, hey, I'd want to do this. So I started meeting with all the folks that I needed to in IT, infrastructure engineering, business applications, and saying, talk to me about what you think about the current intranet. What would you like to see? And what would it take to, kind of make that change? And then I had a bunch of one-on-one meetings, my first probably 3-4 weeks. Yeah, probably the first month, with people all around the organization. So a lot of them were very senior leaders and also some like director level folks that have been there a long time. Tell me how I can be helpful to you. So this accomplishes 2 things. Number 1, I exist here. Number 2, I want to be helpful. I am listening. So it was sort of a way to do a bit of a internal communications audit, like right away, right?
Yeah.
We ended up hiring an external company to come in and do that as well, but it gave me a chance to really gain an understanding right away. And so I kept hearing that from people like our intranet is terrible. Like, can you please do something about that? So, all right, that sentiment's already out there. So planting that seed with IT, because I can't happen without them. It's impossible. So I needed their buy-in. So that took some time. They were very receptive, but then we get into like, oh gosh, the migration. Oh gosh, this, right?
The change part of it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think this is all to say, depending on the initiative, and not just the initiative, because there's not a one size fits all, the tolerance of your audience, right? The employees, like I said, like all of us are probably sick of all the change because of this pandemic, and then exacerbate that with a company that is fast moving, constantly changing in a super competitive environment. And wow, like it can be stressful. So I don't want to come in and be like, change, like just like everything's changing. I have to go slow. And I think that's a good exercise in patience because we know what needs to get done as internal communicators. We know what the problem areas are, but you have to prioritize and then figure out what is my plan for this? What's my comms plan for unveiling this to the whole company? My change management plan? Who do I need to get on board? And how long is this going to take to really do based on the tolerance of the audience, based on the employees? So, and look for your early adopters. Like if you have fans right away, like use them. Oh my God, use them right away. They can be your champions so that when change starts to happen and people go to them because they are kind of like the company influencers, even though they might not be in like senior leadership positions, people go to them because they respect them.
And you might get some of that. You'd mentioned meeting with like directors and above. That you could really get some information there. I'm sure you probably heard that from some of those folks going, our intranet's not great. And that's really where you can start to pick those adopters and influencers.
For sure. And one of the things that we did, early on with the internal communications audit is created a core team for the audit to really get their opinions and solicit ideas. And this is a group that I want to maintain. Like, that's not just for the audit. Like, I want to keep them around and maybe like, switch out members and stuff to make sure we have fresh ideas. And when there's anything major, be like, hey, what do you guys think about this? And then once I get support, like I said, people will go to them anyway, because that's the kind of people they are. Like people are going to them for their opinions on things. They are influencers. They're like, oh yeah, I know. This is awesome because XYZ. We should do this. And then they're kind of, they're champions. They're also proliferating it among their teams. They're telling their leaders about it. So, I think everywhere internal comms is understaffed, right? So,
yeah, absolutely.
You need help.
I've never heard any person go, I have too many staff on these because
Right.
you know that would be ridiculous.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a huge one. And, I try to leverage my manager when I can. My manager is a CEO. And so, he often starts our one-on-ones with, how can I help you? Which is awesome in and of itself. But I sometimes say, like, I need your help with this. Like, I'm going to be doing this. If you could just show up for the first 10 minutes of this meeting, just tell everybody you support this. This is awesome. Like, thank you for your participation. I look forward to seeing the outcome of this. Like, that's really all I need. And maybe it's just 5 minutes. It goes such a long way to help with that. Such a long way. So yeah, it's timing, I think, was the only thing I'd kind of add to some of that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to move to the next segment that connects to this. Next segment's called Seat at the Table.
First, get a seat at the table. Get a seat at the table.
You want a seat at the table?
When we think about these initiatives, whether they be change, M&As, anything big that you're going to need to be a part of in internal comms. I know, from my experience that when IC doesn't have a seat at the table and last minute you're told like, oh, we acquired this company, we're, meeting with their employees tomorrow. And you're like, what? I don't have anything ready, like an intranet site. I don't have documents from HR, nothing, presentations. So my question to you is, I know you work with your CEO now, who sounds very supportive, and that's fantastic. But what advice would you give to someone who's in internal communications, who's really having a difficult time getting a seat at the table to participate in these from the starting line, so that to help prepare and make, any big change initiative successful?
Measure where you can in any way that you can. So you might not always have, like, let's say like someone is at a company where they have like just an intranet that's ancient, that doesn't have a way to measure, right? Gather any kind of anecdotes, right? Someone has probably said to you along the way, this is great, I love this, whatever. If that can be written down somewhere, like all those emails, right? I have a folder that I keep called nice things, and I keep it by
I do
year.
That too.
Do you really?
Yeah.
And I just keep it in
when
there.
When I used to do my performance evaluation, this is a previous boss would say, I want to hear the things that people say that are nice about you.
Yeah.
Because you hold those in. And so I kept a nice folder.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Like it helps to, it's your evidence, right? Like I'm doing something worthy here. And the next part would be find your champions and your supporters, and preferably if they're at, the senior management level, right? VPs and above. If you can find people there that maybe you created a comms plan for someone who resigned on their team unexpectedly, or maybe you've been writing messages for them for a couple of quarters, or maybe you helped with a specific team or department's initiative and getting buy-in on something. Like track all that stuff. And I know that, for me, it's hard because there's so much coming at me at one time. And at my 6 months, I asked for, I have a weekly one-on-one with my manager. And at 6 months, I told them, hey, like I've been here for 6 months. I'd like to talk about, to get any feedback from you about how I've been doing. I want to talk about my career path. And so I was like, you know what? I should sit down and let me just keep it simple. Let me just write a list of stuff I've gotten done. That's it. Just stuff I've gotten done. And it's funny because I've been moving so fast as part of this culture that I kind of went into it thinking, I don't know that I've really gotten anything done. And then I made my list and I was like, oh my gosh, I've done a lot. So you have to record it somehow, like make that list and just keep it like an ongoing document. Find your stakeholders. If you can get, like, if it's emails or you can get someone to write something down, even be like, hey, I know that you said like this person loved this. Is that in an email? Or could you write that down and could you send it to me? That all builds and builds and builds if you don't have tools that you need to measure. If measure likes and comments on content or interactions with email campaigns, if you don't have that, then figure it out a different way to measure it to show that you are making a positive difference. I think sometimes the pulse surveys can help too, right? Like we aren't, depending on the company, aren't always in charge of that. Sometimes it's a function of someone in HR. But if you can get insight into that and add a question, hopefully about communications in there, you might be able to get some measurement in there as well.
Yeah, that's a great, I know like I often try to use, some sort of survey tool after an all hands meeting or after the newsletter goes out just to help gauge, even if you can see even those page views and even just to get that extra sentiment, like, did you, what do you like most about this? Just to really, what can we improve? You're right, that content is super important. Yeah, I'm going to move into our last segment, asking for a friend.
Just asking for a friend. Hey, asking for.
I'm going to get your expertise for our hypothetical friends out there. What do you see are the biggest challenges internal communications professionals face in the future? I mean, we never could have predicted pandemic and everything going digital. And I'm not sure that was like a huge challenge, but it was a challenge, right? We had to train strategies. We had to really focus on good technology. And does the technology meet what we're going to do? So I'm very curious as to what you see we're going to face in the next 5 to 10 years.
I think there's a couple things. One, in the context of this great resignation, great reshuffling, is retaining employees, helping them understand how critical they are to the mission, making sure we're providing an environment that's fulfilling, that has a good work-life balance. That's the first thing that comes to mind. And then just the hybrid environment. So right now, for example, at Guardant, only essential workers are going on site because of Omicron. And we're hoping that maybe we can get back to the office in early March. That lack of human interaction has had a profound effect on a lot of people, on their mental state. Those kind of, what do you call it? Water cooler talk, the kind of the spontaneous, that's the word I'm looking for, the spontaneous conversations that erupt don't anymore. You're just like one Zoom to another Zoom to another. And I just don't think that's natural for us or, sustainable in the long term. So while we have some people that probably are craving that interaction, we also have folks that are like, I'm good. I'll just stay at home. So that hybrid environment is going to be, I think, really challenging moving forward. I don't think that's something that's going to go away, or we're just going to get back to everybody going in the office now. I'm like, no, cat's out of the bag on that one. Like, we are not going backward now. It's hybrid. So how do you connect employees emotionally to a company so that they are fulfilled, they are appreciated in this type of environment where there's so little interaction and opportunities to create relationships? Like I mentioned, we've been hiring so many people. Like some people I've never even seen. Our senior management team don't even know who they are. So how do we do that? Like, how do we create these deeper relationships in these, video conferences? And then once we're in person and we have some people in person, some people not, how are we going to manage that? I think that's tough. And the reason it's tough is because there's no one size fits all, and it's so individual. I mean, we just did a series of kind of fireside chats with our executive management team, kind of senior vice presidents and C-suite folks. And I mean, the feedback runs the gamut, and it just depends on the person. One person is like, I really love this format. This is great. Perfect. I wouldn't change anything. Someone else is like, this is way too big. There needs to be 10 to 15 people in here. One person is, this is wonderful. I love how personal it is. One person was like, this was awful. So I don't think any of us can kind of go down that rabbit hole of trying to please everyone. It's not possible. It just makes it a little harder. Like, how can you have the broadest positive impact? And that's, you have to always, you're kind of doing change management on yourself, right? You're like, all right, well, that didn't work. I'm going to have to figure out.
It's exactly. The past 2 years, I feel like, has been this interesting. I love being a part of this, almost like a paradigm shift in internal communications, right? Where this stuff works at past, and now we're all just like, oh my gosh, we got to kind of really figure out what works for our company and for our employees. It's a lot different. I think about, you've alluded to it, the new employee experience, right? When you can't go in an office, you can't walk by people's desks, you can't lean over a cue ball at your coworker and go, how do I submit an expense report? Just those little things where you have to book time with someone. Now you're taking a real time from their day, and it's tomorrow because they're booked up with other meetings.
Right.
It's a very interesting change that we're seeing. Absolutely. It's going to be interesting to continue to try to navigate this.
Yeah, for sure. It's so interesting to think about how we started and the frame of mind of folks, employees at the start of the pandemic, which was more along the lines of, oh my God, what does this mean for my job? Am I going to lose my job? Am I going to get laid off? To now people are like, peace, I'm out, like so
Right.
different.
Yeah.
Just in a
It's
couple
completely
years, it's
different.
like, none of us, I don't know that any of us could have foreseen this, but it just
No.
keeps changing all the time.
Yeah. And that's an interesting thing to think back. And I'm glad you brought that up. Just that, I mean, it's still, COVID's still very scary, but that first 6 months to a year was just, I mean, I remember where I was living in Madison, Wisconsin. They didn't want us leaving our homes.
Right.
Don't even go outside.
Right. I know.
And just like, what?
Yes.
Scared to go to the
Yes.
grocery store. And then on top of that, being an employee, and people had kids at home, and just dealing with life at the same time was rough.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been stressful. I know a lot of folks have started, yeah, I mean, even like a year and a half ago, started saying it's not really working from home anymore. It's living at work.
Yeah.
And I kind of, I laughed at that the first time I heard it, like, aha, that's really funny. But I started feeling that myself, like sometimes I feel like I have to go out to dinner on nights I normally wouldn't just so I can get out of my house because I work here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So-
Yeah.
That can take a
I-
toll on everybody.
I feel very fortunate. I have my own office that's set up for work, and I
Yeah.
don't generally come in here. I actually have, like a craft room, and then like downstairs.
Yeah.
So I don't come in here unless I'm working.
Yeah.
Because it's a different feel. So I'm
Yeah.
very fortunate that way. But it is different, and I've been thinking about it in terms of I spoke with someone on this podcast a few months ago. We're really not even in the employee experience more. We're it's the human experience, and work's just a part of it, but we're interacting with that, right? I don't know how many times, and I love it to see, new parents with their baby while they're on meetings, because that's just the life that we're living in.
Right.
Or dogs barking,
Right.
freaking out in the background, my dog's barking, or,
Yeah.
the we need a plumber to come by. So it's a completely different world we're living
Yeah.
in. We don't bring employees to work anymore, and we have their full undivided attention as employees.
Right.
We're now living in their space. So it's just
Yeah.
very interesting. Do you have any like final thoughts on that?
This came up the other day in a meeting, and one of the things that I would say is a positive is just exactly what you described. Is like, we used to talk so much about bringing your authentic self to work, but we thought about it very physically. I go to the office, this is what I'm like at the office. I leave the office, this is what I'm like when I leave the office. But now those lines are so blurred. So blurred. We have parents on calls. I mean, that has happened at Guardant, where someone's having a meeting and like their 3-year-old, 4-year-old, he might have been 5, came over and sat on his lap, and he just kept talking. Like he just was like, he was in the middle of saying something to like a group of probably like 80 people. And he was like, hey, bud. And then he just kept talking. And everybody, like people were like, that's so cute. Oh my God, I love your kids. So we're getting employees' full selves more so than we ever have before. And I think that there's some good in that. Being able to feel like your authentic self at work and being like, this is me, like take it or leave it. Like, I think,
Yeah. I agree.
it's been an
Yeah.
issue, I think, in some places where people just don't like, and what for whatever reason might feel like an other. And here, I feel like there's a little bit of democratization there, where it's like, oh, like here I am, like I've got like a dragon on my wall, like in the background, and this stuff over here, and my dog just barked, and I'm trying to do a presentation, and he's barking because he's decided the FedEx man is here to murder us, that kind of
Right,
stuff.
yeah.
And I think that that's some of the good things that have come out of this. There's a couple other good things. I think you mentioned that, now instead of kind of peeking over someone's cubicle wall and being like, how do I do that again? Now you have to write out in like an email or a Slack message. And while that is kind of annoying, you really have to get your thoughts put together clearly. You have to write that and articulate that clearly so that it's not a back and forth. You don't have time for a conversation now, right? Like now it's booking time, as you said. So you have to figure out a way to get that kind of done the first time, especially if you're working in a company that is global and you're in completely different time zones. Like, I have to figure out how to write this email clearly, say what I want clearly, because while I'm sleeping, they're working, and there's like maybe like an hour of overlap there. And this is it. And if I don't do this now, it's going to take another week to get this done. So, I mean, there's some good things in it, but I think that's why a hybrid model is nice. If you want to go in the office and have that interaction and those spontaneous conversations, you can do that. And then on the days you want to kind of stay home and just have Zoom meetings, you can do that as well. So
in your pajamas, to stay home and take some meetings. In
exactly, exactly.
Or at least pajama bottoms.
Yeah, no one knows I'm wearing slippers right now, right?
I hear that a lot. Well, Andréa, this has been so much fun, and I really appreciate you bringing all your expertise. I've learned a lot today. Before I let you go, let our listeners know where they can find you.
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So you can find me there. Andréa Topper. I think that's my actual name. I had when I got married, I had the kind of a identity crisis, and I had to figure out what I wanted to do there. But yeah, Andréa Topper would probably be the best place to find me. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you for joining me today. This has been fantastic.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it, Amanda.